to Atypical Talk. This is a podcast where we have conversations that illuminate the intersection of faith, culture, and the common spaces of our humanity. I'm Abby.
And I'm Joel. And today we have one of our favorite guests back with us. By popular demand, we have Creation Desautels with us, and she is a mental health professional, a therapist in our community, and we had such a great time talking about the intersections of culture and faith and mental health a couple months ago. We thought there's so much more we could mine into and dig into, because this is such an emerging topic that's very much in the cultural eye right now, and we want to definitely shine light on it. And so thank you so much for being so gracious to hang out with us again, and so that we can learn from you and have these really fun, complicated conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be back.
So our first topic today, it's a New York Times article titled, "Are We Talking Too Much About Mental Health?" Mental health awareness campaigns, researchers argue, help some young people identify disorders that badly need treatment, but they have a negative effect on others, leading them to overinterpret their symptoms and see themselves as more troubled than they are. It's creating this message that teenagers are vulnerable. They're likely to have problems, and the solution is to outsource them to a professional, said Dr. Folks from Oxford University. There's a risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, Dr. Schleider, professor at Northwestern University, said. The response can't be, forget all of it. It should be, what about this intervention was unhelpful? Awareness campaigns are bound to have multiple effects, helping some students and not others. So do you agree with the argument that we're overdoing it?
The pendulum swings, is what it feels like, yeah.
So I actually think the question is poorly constructed, which is a very therapist thing to say. But I don't think the question is, are we doing too much or are we doing too little? I think the question is, are we doing it well and thoughtfully? Because if you're doing something well and thoughtfully, it's really hard to be thoughtful too much, I think. So I would say it's not that we're talking too much. It's that I actually think we are not talking carefully, not talking well, and we are not contextualizing therapy, and we are not educating adults, teens, just the common culture well about what therapy is, what it can do, what it cannot do, what mental illness is, what it is not, and the difference between regular discomfort, regular unpleasant, regular gray humanity, and that which is statistically or clinically significant. So I don't think we're talking too much. I think we're talking badly, and I think we're talking in feedback loops, in the sense that kids create content and they imbibe content created by other children, and children are watching content from psychologists and therapists that their primary function now is advertising generation by clicks and likes. So they're not necessarily interested in a nuanced clinical approach to data dissemination. They're interested in that clever mic drop moment. So I think we're not talking too much. I think we're talking badly.
So help me understand, like you say that we're not talking thoughtfully about it. What is sort of a delineation difference between how you see it's being talked about, and then what would be a thoughtful approach to that same topic?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And that is multifactorial, like super nuanced. So let's take one piece and isolate it. One piece of how we're not talking thoughtfully is, over the last 150 years in particular, there has been a meaning drift between the word trauma. It used to be that therapists wouldn't even clinically consider something to be a trauma for which one would qualify for having, say, post-traumatic stress, unless the precipitating event was definitionally rare and beyond that which any normal human being could metabolize or grapple with. So we have seen the meaning of trauma drift into the common lexicon, such that trauma is like anything mildly uncomfortable. So when we don't make that meaningful distinction, when it's like, do you feel traumatized? And they're like, well, I mean, now that you mention it, I kind of do. No, you don't. What you're experiencing is
Life.
You're experiencing maturational discomforture. You are experiencing situational. You are experiencing role stress, role strain. In our first talk on mental health matters, I tried to make this distinction when I talked about trauma and then just like human gray, right? And and it's not just the common culture. Therapists increasingly have broadened so that trauma is now anything that I don't like that I think about kind of a lot. And so we're not even clearly defining diagnostic criteria so that people are self-diagnosing because we actually have this broad, expansive definition. And really, I can't tell you how many people come in and are like, I'm married to a narcissist. And it's like,
yeah, those labels.
And then I'll ask diagnostic criteria and they're like, no. I mean, kind of, no. And it's like your husband or your wife is a narcissist. They're just a plain old regular garden variety jerk. And it's not clinical. I mean, I'm not saying that by all means, talk to your friends, your pastoral counseling, your communities, right? I'm not saying that doesn't deserve a growth curve. I'm saying that doesn't necessarily merit clinical intervention. And we're not so just in terms of what does and does not meet criteria of mental illness, that's one area and that echo chamber, right? But then there are others, parents not making meaningful distinctions between good parenting and good therapying. And so parents are condemning themselves that they don't parent their kids like a therapist does. But the reality is those tools in the room are designed to be taught and flavor particular kinds of interactional patterns in families or communities. But nobody can, in all circumstances, all day long, do nothing but assume and optimize, for the sake of argument, just one skill like reflective listening. Like imagine if absolutely every conversation you tried to have, somebody said something and the first thing you did was reflectively listen and be like, so what I heard you say is...
Yeah, I would not have very many friends at all. Nobody would want to talk to me.
Well, and you would also have no time because so this idea that parents are now judging themselves as effective or ineffective parents as to whether or not they can hold a therapeutic frame for their kids. Mm-hmm. But actually, the therapeutic frame is a specific frame for specific functionalities. But like, I don't need to know little Timmy's deep and intervening thoughts about stay out of the road, man. Like, stay out of the road or I'm going to beat your butt.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and... some parents gentle parent and they don't spank, but take the point. What I'm saying is even gentle parents that don't spank, they feel bad if they raise their voice. They feel bad. What it is, and so there's this sense we're not making clear, good distinctions. So it's not that I don't think we should be having robust conversations about like, there are things that have real needs. There are things that are yellow flags that we should be coming alongside in communities, in families, in faith apparatuses. We should be doing all of those things. But what we're doing is like, everybody needs therapy now and everybody's broken. And it's like, well, okay, go back to Garden of Eden. We are all on some level broken. We are not all clinically significant in our brokenness or in the variety of our brokenness.
I think for me, where I find this conversation interesting is I want to hold a healthy balance because, I mentioned the pendulum swing, because I do feel like for way too long, nobody would talk about mental health and there was shame attached to the conversation. And especially as a male, the idea of going to therapy was like, bro, really? Like, it was like emasculating.
I didn't know you needed to go inpatient.
Yeah. Like it's those kind of things. And I feel like now, and there's been a lot of beauty from it, but the pendulum has swung to where, like you said, everything is trauma and everyone has these big things that they need to deal with and process with a third party. The question that I have is, recognizing that yes, they're all present, but I wonder if you feel like there is just a lack of that human grit of like our people and our families and our faith communities and neighborhoods. Are we not producing the same level of just grit of like going through hard things? Like we tell our boys all the time, even at 5 and 3, we're like, you can do hard things, buddy. Like you can do this and we're going to be right beside you as you do it, but we're not going to pick you up to do it for you. Like you can do it. And sometimes that's like picking up your dirty clothes and putting them in the hamper jack. You can do it, buddy. I believe in you, buddy. But it's those, I wonder if you sense that this overswing of the pendulum is making it to where people feel like they don't have the tools just to do hard things and to go through adverse life experiences, which is all a part of our lives. Like every day we have to do things that are hard, that we don't like to do, or have conversations that are uncomfortable. Like it's just part of it. And I know that can sound crass and it can sound minimizing to what people are going through. And I'm not specifically talking about anybody specifically in their life, but I wonder for you, like, do you feel like there's just a lack of that grit?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think, so I recently read this book, Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier.
I have heard multiple people talk about
it.
Yeah.
10 out of 10, highly recommend.
There's a pastor I follow on Twitter who had their whole pastoral staff read it, and they thought it was really, really helpful for this moment. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I'll say is there are areas, like I don't agree wholesale. I push back on some of her stuff, but broadly speaking, she makes a lot of points, and I love it that I think she's a secular Jew.
Okay.
And I love, like, when I find myself being like, that argument holds water and it neatly aligns with, this is when I think we've probably got some really robust data and we've got something.
All truth is God's truth.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm like, when totally like a-religious or nominally religious folks or differently religious folks are like, this really resonates. I'm like, yeah, me too. We're probably onto something really thoughtful and constructive. But she talks about a lot of things. For example, one of the major critiques I have as a mental health provider is often we rate the success of our clinical work on the client's subjective experience of euthymia, which is a big fancy medical word for am I happy? And quite frankly, as Christians, I don't think we can make the case that happy is a great barometer of whether or not I'm doing the right thing. There are a lot of things that to walk out with integrity will require me doing a myriad of individual component tasks that I don't want to do.
Yeah, suffering is kind of what you sign up for in the Christian life. There's going to be an element of that on this side of eternity. Yeah.
But like, even if you're not a person of faith, like anybody that's ever completed a bachelor's or a master's, did you every morning be like, I feel like going to class? Like, I hedonically want to write the term. No, you end up doing, like, you have a bigger why, or you have a goal, or you want vengeance. You have a something, you have a driving force. And for that driving force, you're willing to tolerate a myriad of unpleasant individual moments. And I do believe that therapy, with its focus on, hey, check in, evaluate, that, like that pendulum swing, right? Like, it's important to check in. Yeah. It is not important to check in all the time, in all circumstances, in all modalities. And even when I check in and I find myself wildly unhappy, that doesn't necessarily mean, therefore, I should go do something that would be more fun. Sometimes the answer is, yeah, I just need to radically accept that this moment is not a happy-fying moment. And so, yes, I agree that there's a lack of grit. I think it's great that we're encouraging checking in, but happiness is a data point. It's not the only relevant data point. And I think that's where the swing has gone. It's this idea of like, well, find your joy. You should be happy. And I think the Christian insight is like, if you live a life of integrity, if you're seeking a rightly ordered existence in line with your creator, you will often be happy, but the guarantee is not always and only happy. Yeah. And just because you're not happy for like a really long time doesn't mean you're ill. It might be systemic, it might be structural, it might be that you're isolated and you've done it intentionally or unintentionally, and none of those things that mean necessarily that you need a therapist. They might mean you need community or that you need other resource. But these days it seems like the default is, if I'm not happy, I should find a therapist so I can go get happy. Yeah.
One more thought on this and then we'll move on. We got a lot of ground to cover. Sure. But I just think it is interesting you bring up community, because I think part of the positive move in the upswing of talking about mental health has been community around people saying, yeah, I'm proud of you for going through this, and they commiserate with you. They'll say, man, this does suck, this is terrible. Yeah. The other part of community that I feel like we need to have an uptick in our churches and in our society is like that kind of grit keep going. You can do this, man. I believe in you. This sucks. This is terrible, but keep going. And I'm going to like lift your arms when I can lift your arms, but you can do this. We can do this together. And I feel like sometimes whether that be in groups in church or our faith community or, people that we work alongside of, our neighbors, like we can do that better instead of just commiserating, saying this does suck, this is awful. Yeah, do that, but also spur them on. And I think that's something I know I can grow in, to where maybe you don't need to go to a therapist for this inconvenience or this hard season, but maybe you need a community to lift you up or lift your arms when you can't lift your arms anymore, to keep moving forward with you. I think that's good.
I think that's accurate. I also think that there's this one corrective that I would make to that, which is sometimes it's
Correct me, Creation, go.
I have thoughts.
Yeah.
I think it's good when we say you can do this. I also think one of the things that in particular as Christians we struggle to do is a very apparent opposite. Recognize that moment where we're like, nope, you can't. You cannot do that. You are out, I'm out of my depth, and so are you. And sometimes again, when we are out of our depth, the default is, so you should go to a therapist, but actually sometimes you're out of your depth, man. This is a work that only God can do in your life. Like, you cannot fix that broken space by sheer willpower. And a clinician can give you tools and resources and a place, but ultimately maybe there's an existential healing that needs to, so I think
strength from outside of you.
You need more than just like a pick me up and encouragement. And I think oddly, both ends, the Christian community struggles. We struggle to be like, yep, out of our depth. That's either like a clinician or maybe medication or maybe a spiritual work in your life, or the other. Sometimes we struggle to be real encouragers, and instead we do that, like we make people inspiration porn. It's like, you're great and you inspire me. Like, I'm not going to help you or anything. Like, I got my own stuff to do, but like, you're inspiring for being through that. So I think we struggle at the margins on both sides.
All right, I stand corrected. That's a much better point. Altogether, we made a pretty good point altogether.
No, I mean, it was mutual. I mean, I agreed with you. I think there was, I just said,
good.
It's
I think that's a really good, that's good thought.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Good. Well, our next topic today, it's a Mirror article titled "Millionaire Who Made Himself Homeless and Broke for YouTube Views Forced to Quit Social Experiment." Mike Black wanted to prove anyone could make $1 million in just 12 months, but fell short of his goal, quitting the project after 10 months, having made just $64,000 because health and family come first. Mike cited his 2 autoimmune diseases, which caused chronic fatigue and joint pain, as the cause for him retiring from the project and bringing to light what truly matters: health and gratitude. Mike explains he started the challenge to show people you could build an empire through the simple power of hard work. He struggled at first to even get water, but slowly started making money by selling furniture, which led him to be able to purchase a computer and rent an office space. After 3 months, he started as a social media manager and came up with his own brand of coffee. With 60 days to go, Mike said, "We should always remember to help those in need, because it could be the opportunity that they need." So what did you guys think of this story?
Boo! I mean, the audacity. Is this a TikTok thing, Abby? Was this on TikTok?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I was going to rip your TikTok platform too in the process. But anyway, I mean, to me, it's like your TikTok, like you are the owner of TikTok. No, I mean, this seems like just a joke in so many ways. Like, I mean, I get what he's trying to do, but there are just so many different determining factors to somebody building an empire or having wealth. I mean, there is the old adage, teach a man,
give a man
a fish,
feed
and
him
for a day, teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, kind of thing. But one of my mentors and friends, Jeff Newton, who we've had on the podcast before, has talked about the problem with that is that a lot of people don't even have access to the pond, and our networks and our community, our relationships are really a determining factor beyond knowing how to fish or, that kind of a thing. Because I think they play such a huge part of it. Even this guy who made himself broke, he had a privileged education and probably had a stable family background to where there were all these other determining factors that gave him a leg up to go into this and make his own coffee brand and do those other things. And he had a
resume going into this.
Yeah, so he already had a resume and all these experiences that you're never starting with a blank slate. So, I mean, I think the whole thing is just a joke because he had so many things ahead of him than a random broke homeless person on the street who's trying to go in for a job. So, I mean, I think it's ridiculous to think that somebody just with sheer willpower can build an empire for himself, and not determining all of your life experiences, your networks, your relationships, your parents, your family history, all those different kind of things. So of course it didn't work out, and he has these autoimmune diseases that I'm certain that when he had resources and his family had health care earlier in life to where they could do things to take care of these things, so they weren't the limiting factor that they were when he was doing this fun viral experiment. So yes, about the only thing I really agree with Mike is the last thing he said, that we should always remember to help those in need, because it could be the opportunity that they need. I mean, I think I agree with that. My politicians, 2 thumbs up to that, right? But man, it just seems like a folly to think that like anybody can do this. Just pull yourself up from your bootstraps, and I can do this all by myself. The man who made the billion-dollar company just in his garage, kind of thing. To me, that's how I respond to it. But I have some strong thoughts. But,
It gives very much like those millionaires who say, "Oh, just don't go to Starbucks anymore, and you'll end up like me." Like,
If you want to change everything,
that's not how that works. I don't even go to Starbucks. That doesn't even help. But and I'm not saying very privileged take.
It's a privileged take, and I just think that like, yes, hard work is great, and we should like teach and raise our kids to work hard and have some grit to do the hard things, and not expect to have this 7-figure salary on day one or ever, but to like sort of make it this spectacle of the social experiment, to think anybody can do this. I'm going to prove to anybody that I was needing watered this day, and now I've got my own coffee brand and I'm selling furniture. Like, that's just not the way it works all the time. Yeah. So what do you think?
As I was thinking about it, a lot of things come to mind. So first of all, I think the way the experiment was set up encourages like black and white thinking in an extreme, because it's like he says, I'm going to negate all my resource. Now, we can critique the fact that he didn't actually negate all resource. For him to have actually negated, it would have been closer to, I put all of my worldly goods in a charitable trust. I now have no access, to any money.
Yeah, because there's a fallback. There's a fallback, right?
So the reality is, even as he's doing this, he knew, as evidenced by the fact that before the 12 months was up, he opted out. He knew at any time. Yeah. So if you're just objectively poor, you don't have an opt-out. And if you do, right, you can endure, because there's that knowledge. At the end of 12 months, I can go back to, but let's go ahead and forego that critique. And let's go with, he had abandoned his advantage. And he says, well, I'm going to set out to prove that anybody can be a millionaire. And then he says, my experiment failed. But if he had set up something much more realistic, for example, I'm setting out to prove that your hard work is going to shape your outcomes. Well, he started with not enough money for water, and even his very first sleep. I'm going to find free furniture that people are giving off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. I'm going to wash it up and refurbish it and resell it. Is that man a millionaire? No, but could that man feed himself that day? Yeah, that guy can feed himself. So I think it's interesting that he, after 10 months, says, I failed. And I said, you only failed because you were attempting to prove that which is statistically anomalous to begin with. If you had set out to prove the much more modest and realistic and truly relevant for the vast majority of human history, the population, what you would say is your attitude, your work ethic, and your ingenuity applied will necessarily impact your lived experiences for the good if you consistently show up and apply those things. Even if you don't have the benefit of all those other privileges, you don't need a college education to wash and strip and sand and flip an end table. You could do that, and there are plenty of YouTubers out there that are making channels doing nothing but that. So I don't think it failed, but let me say this. I don't think the success or failure of the experiment was ever the point. I think the point was, again, to create social media buzz. Yeah. So
Because that sounds much more viral, and it sounds like click-worthy. Anybody can become a millionaire, you know. Then it does. Anybody can have positive life experiences and feed themselves if they have hard work.
Yeah,
Doesn't buzz as much.
Nobody's going to clickbait for if you work hard, you can probably nominally make it by. Or maybe better.
Yeah, that sounds like the same thing. Like, look how much weight this person lost, or like, or the headline or because they took Ozempic or something like that. And the other headline would be like, a new study says that diet and exercise actually helps your health. You're like, no one's clicking that second one.
Or nobody wants to click through. Fat woman runs a marathon. You too can just be comfortable in your fat little body and do stuff. Nobody wants to say that. Everybody wants to say there's this miracle to the black or white, the binary ends, the pendulum swings. It's like you can go from nothing to wealthy. And it's like, maybe that's not the story. But if the story was how you show up matters, sure, that's a feasible story. And then in the end, I love how he says, well, I was forced to end it. No, you just woke up one day
and it was uncomfortable, and you're like, I don't have to do this.
And so, thus proving my point about even grit among the wealthy. No, and he says, well, my dad and my autoimmune. Okay, but if you're objectively poor and you can't, there's this. If you're objectively poor, you might not have a meaningful choice between, do I go get the medical care I need, and do I go to work to feed myself and my family? So again, I just thought the whole construct was a farce.
Yeah.
And I think it belies the way media works in the brain, which is we have to make it catastrophic and sensationalized rather than having the much more realistic discussion. So in essence, it wasn't a social experiment. It was a straw man of a social experiment. And I think it was just pretty weak and unconstructive across the board. I
hadn't even thought about the reality of, like, you know, he didn't actually forego his wealth, you know, because like he would have given it to a charity and like actually not had that to fall back on. I think back on maybe some of the riskier things that I've done in my life, even like with stepping out and starting Bridgeway. Like, my wife and I signed some pretty scary pieces of paper, and we emptied out our savings to get things off the ground and going. But we actually had the privilege of having a tight-knit family network and family that were behind us, that we knew that if this whole thing failed and we'd have to start over from scratch, or we'd have to borrow money,
or living in dad's basement,
living in the basement, we had all those fallbacks to where, yeah, it was risky in some way, but like, I knew I had a fallback. At the end of the day, if this whole thing went belly up and this wasn't God's story and he wasn't going to like have it go the way that was going to support us, like, I had that fallback. And that in and of itself is a privilege, and it's wealth that was there that I never thought I'd be out on the street.
Yeah, you never were like, we will be destitute. You're making another point about the thing he didn't raise. And this is, again, back to one of my big bugbears, which is the idea of community. Yeah. This guy says, I'm going to go from poverty to wealth. And he really makes this and focuses on access to money.
Much more than that.
At no point in time does this guy say, you know what, while it is true, I've tied my hands and I don't have access to these financial resources. I have my friends, I have my family, I have my church club, I have mutual aid societies, I have all of this human resource. So what I'm going to do, rather than going out, it's all dramatic to be like, I can't get water, right? But if he had one buddy, he could have called up his buddy and been like, can I sleep on your couch and have a glass of water while I'm figuring out, because I'm trying to like scaffold and prove that you can do it, because there's just a total negation of the human capital of friendship and community. It really is this: wealth is about the dollar, resources about the dollar. And I want to push back on that. If that guy, but again, that social experiment is far less dramatic.
It's boring.
He's like, I'm going to abandon all my worldly goods, but I am going to have spaghetti tonight at mom's house. Right? It just is so less dramatic.
She's going to do my laundry.
She's going to do my laundry. Also, she might give me a little bit of a loan for some gas money so I can go mow lawns. Yeah, that's way less dramatic, because the point is, can you do it with absolute nothing? But the reality is, the vast majority of us, at least in developed countries, even if you have nothing, you could go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a Rotary Club or a small business and say, I got nothing. Can you help? And there's good data on this.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to give you a drink of water. Somebody's going to let you couch surf. There's going to be room at a local rescue mission. And we act as if there's no resource. And the reality is often in this day and age, we're so isolated, we're so disconnected. And I'm not saying this to anybody in particular. We are too prideful to use the human capital and to use the relationships and the connection that binds us all as a way to leverage success. And we act as if me and my money is what makes me successful.
Yeah. It's an American fantasy of the self-made man and woman, isn't it? It really is.
It's not even America.
But I know, but there's something about American and our capitalist system to where we love hearing the stories of the guy who had nothing and then he's there, rags to riches.
Yeah.
That self-made story. And you're right, it's a human story. But I think there's something about in our media, in our culture, that we're drawn to those. We want to click on these stories, right? And it's just a fantasy. Like, none of us are self-made. We've had people along the way. And I think this story being such a folly and such a farce it just shows that once again is like, man, nobody is. And you couldn't even prove it, buddy. So
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So our next topic is a CNN article. It's titled "Man or Bear? A Viral Question Has Spawned Scary Responses." The question, directed towards women, seems simple. Would you rather be alone in the woods with a man or a bear? Well, there's no unanimous answer. A good number of women have made it clear they'd prefer the bear. This has sparked anger among some men online. But more than that, it has snowballed into a valuable discussion about violence against women and how danger doesn't always take the shape of a wild animal on the prowl. When asked why they would pick the bear, women all give some iteration of the same answer. With a bear, they know what the dangers are. They know, at least in theory, how to survive the encounter. Another user added a layer of nuance, pointing out that men, or people in general, can lie, make false promises, downplay their own danger, and generally be predatory on a level no bear could ever be. So what do you think? Do you think this conversation is helpful, harmful? What have you thought about? Have you even heard about this before I sent you this?
Ladies, the floor is yours. I'm just going to listen.
Okay, so I had not heard of this before I read the article. I have read a theme and variation of this, but I think this exemplifies so many of the pitfalls of the echo chamber that is social media, in the sense that, so first of all, when we look at the metadata, there is no time in human history that women have been safer. Just statistically speaking, violent crimes against women, domestic violence, no time in human history have women been more capable, and in Western civilization writ large, and even in other non-Western cultures, women are outpacing men as college graduates. Women have never had it sweeter in all of human history. And this is going to sound very there will be people that will not like me in the comments on this one. I say this, and I thought about it before I came in when I was reading the prep for the podcast. We have never had it better, and we have never been more shrill as we complain about how rough it is. And so what I want to point out is a lot of this has to do with the feedback of positive media gets significantly less traction. So if you see these things and the algorithm sees you click on those things, it will give you more of those things. And it just loads that content into your mind, thus informing, even if you think you know it's entertainment, your mind doesn't propositionally critique every last one of those bits of media. And what happens is you imbibe a message that you're not really evaluating very well. And so now, I'm not saying there aren't good and legitimate critiques to be made about relations between the sexes. This is just not a very constructive one, is my point. And what it does is it plays to women making visceral statements about safety, but when they're talking about safety, they're not talking about physical safety, like, am I going to get dead? They're talking about a sense of emotional safety. It can and will a man manipulate or lie or otherwise lack integrity in his dealings with me? So now they're overinflating the risk of physical death, which is what happens when a bear finds you and attacks you. Like, you get dead right? We're conflating that with, he really hurt my feelings because he lied to me. And I think that this is a false equivalency. So I think the way it was constructed was, as so much, designed to be sensational and interesting. I think it's non-constructive, and what it highlights is a lack of social learning, because we're online, we're not navigating real face-to-face relationships. It navigates the way electronic moderation makes people feel less of the guilt that they would feel. Like, if I can cheat you online and I never have to see your face, at a statistical level, I'm so much more likely to do that than if I have to like rob you in person. So we don't look at the ways electronic formatting allows for a rise in a lack of integrity with limited consequences. I just think the way it's constructed doesn't lead to the heart of the matter, which is men and women need to learn how to be in real-time, real-space relationship again. That's a dying art. And then the fragilization of the false equivalency between emotive and physical danger, and the fact that, like, if you were to, see, we do the man-bear thing, and that's funny, but if you were to go to that same woman and be like, you can choose between dying and have your feelings hurt, what do you want? The woman would be like, I'd rather have my feelings hurt most of the time. Okay, well, so the way we pose the question predisposes us to have that sensational answer. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to pause. What are your thoughts?
I think, I don't know if it's necessarily talking about having feelings hurt, more so afraid of being sexually assaulted. I think that's the fear. I mean, if I have a man walking by my car, I'm going to lock it. I don't care who the man is, unless I know them, I'm going to be locking my car. Or like, I think of my sister will text me and be like, hey, there's a guy sitting on my porch. I'd much rather have a bear sitting on her porch. Like, I don't know what that man wants, you know? And so for me, I don't think the conversation is helpful whatsoever, but I understand where a lot of the women are coming from in the answer. But yeah, like, the conversation itself it's going to just pit women and men against each other.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, right? Your real-time discussions, and anecdotally, I have women, and I have those same knee-jerk reactions. Mm-hmm. One of the things I want to point out is, and Jonathan Haidt, if you've read Coddling of the American Mind or The Anxious Generation.
That's a new one, The Anxious Generation, right? Have you read it?
So good. I've read it twice.
I've heard it's crazy.
It's the bomb.
Really important.
Yeah, but here's what I want to say, and it was so interesting as I was reading both of those books, and I'm not going to, if I conflate one book with the other, I've read them both twice in the last month, so I'm not sure which book I'm pulling from. Just going to caveat right there. It talks about the rise of safetyism and how the rise of safetyism began with, like, Jonathan Walsh, America's Most Wanted. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? And the idea of, now that we have broadcast media and we are broadcasting large, like across expanses of space, every time a kid's taken, every time there's an assault, every time there's a thing. But again, at the statistical level, you are more safe now than you have ever been. And one of the stats I read, and I'd have to go back and look up where it's from, you could put a kid on a front stoop in the seediest borough of Manhattan, of the 5 boroughs. And on average, it would take 200,000 hours for that child to be kidnapped.
Yeah.
And yet, that impulse to, like, lock your car is predicated on this idea that we actually think it is much more common than it actually is. And there's great data. People that watch Law and Order SVU, which is a show that when I was a kid, I remember watching, and it was great. The good guy always wins, and right, like, it's an engaging show, but they overestimate the amount of physical assault, sexual assault, intimate partner violence by magnitudes of thousands.
Well, they got 24 episodes to fill a season.
Yeah. But this is what I'm saying, and now...
Yeah, media drives our fears in so many different ways, right?
And so the reality is, and this is one of the things I've started, and I'm not gonna lie, does my heart skip a beat? Do I get a little bit sweaty in the palms? But I've started encouraging my young girls, like, yeah, you can walk without me. You can go into the store absent, like, you need to learn how to navigate. And it's like, look, walk with your head up, know where you're going, know what items you need to get, but you can go and navigate the public spaces safely, because the reality is the public spaces have never been safer. And this is, I think, one of the things we don't get. Look, we can talk about Law and Order SVU, and we can be like, oh yeah, I know that's fake. But when I see these reels that are made by content creators that have that everyman quality, I am much more likely to think that that is like truth. It's like it's real, and it's like it may be real, but it's only anecdotally real. And the reality is 90% of the high traffic content is produced by 10% of the creators. And if you're somebody that is a victim of some kind of violence or abuse, or you got an axe to grind, you're producing lots of content, and but guess what? Nobody views the I walked safely on the city streets and no man touched me. Actually, there was a guy that helped me carry. Like, nobody wants to see that real. And so what we end up seeing is the minority content fills the majority of viewing space, and then we act as if that's authentic and real. And it's like, well, it is. It's just statistically that should be like, single digits of our viewing, and then 90% of our viewing should be like back to people lovingly throwing frisbees in the park and being neighborly. And the reality is nobody wants to watch that. It's super boring. So I think you're not wrong to have that visceral reaction. I think when we try and generalize it, what we're really doing is we're taking my subjective and saying that's how that's how society writ large is. And it's just not true when we look at the metadata. But most of the people that are imbibing this aren't nerdy like me. Like, my ratio of like I'm reading academic works or works by academics for common consumption, juxtaposed to like I'm just watching common content on social media platforms. I would guess that I'm way inverted against the average person who spends very little in the information and very lots of time with the visceral content. And it's like, you got to check those assumptions. But I think it's great that we at base agree, like, the way it was set up was never designed to be constructive. And I think that's the in principle. I think these days, when people are asking questions, they are asking them designed to do Republican, Democrat, men against women, progressive versus, like, it's designed to create a grunge match between the two, as opposed to asking, hey, where's the commonality, or where's the collaboration, or where's the potential for growth or good, I mean, because none of that is it's just not as sexy when it comes to clickbait.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts?
Good thoughts.
He's like, I don't want to touch it with this.
I don't want to get into it too much. I just wanted to say that I think it's interesting. Like, in the article, it said, women were saying that with a bear, they know where the dangers are, or at least in theory, how to survive in an encounter. And there are, maybe just because of our physical differences, that danger that could be with men and women. But also, I know that women are really mean and cruel to other women, and you don't know where they're coming after as well. So it's almost like it should have been human versus bear in that way. Okay. Psychologically,
So I agree with that, because one of the things that comes into my office, and this is probably some of the deepest work I've done as a clinician, I've worked with men that have been physically assaulted by their intimate partners. I've dealt with men who felt like they were being sexually objectified by women. And one of the hardest parts, and I've just had a number of conversations that were so powerful, because I was the first woman that they felt like they could say that to. And I said, and I was weeping as they're sharing these stories with me. And they said, every other time I've said that to a woman, it's like, well, you should be grateful. You should be grateful that, or when it comes to like the sexually aggressive woman, or when it comes to a physically aggressive woman, that same thing where I say, I'm there and I'm weeping with them as they process this truly horrific event, them being like, you're the first woman that didn't just say, well, it's not like she can really hurt you.
Yeah.
Right? I think that there is, but again, the way it was structured was really designed to pit
men versus women.
As opposed to the idea that both women and men can be abusive, and women's sociopathy makes itself manifest not in, I'm going to punch you in the face. It's like, I'm going to socially eviscerate you in the public sphere. And if we act like that isn't a form of maniacal abuse, it absolutely is. And in today's social economy, women's abuse towards men often is obfuscated while men are excoriated. I think that is a fair point to make.
Those are a lot of big words. Say that again in words that I can understand.
Okay, so obfuscated, let's minimize. Made light of.
Yeah.
And excoriating. Men are like taken in the public sphere and flogged.
Yeah.
It's like, and a man doesn't even need to hit a woman. It's like, if you lorded your physical presence over a woman, it's like, well, you should have known better. Meanwhile, a woman's trotting out all of her man's private data and flooding it in the blogosphere where it lives forever. And it's like, well, she was angry. We must understand and hold space for her trauma, right? I'm just saying, we're not holding men and women to similar standards, because in some sense we are more permissive of the ways women make manifest their evil intent, and we view it as like not that bad because, you know, like they're just women. I'm like, no, they can do real damage.
All I know is I'll remember not to bring up my wife's sociopathy the next time we have an argument.
You should not. That will not play well for you at all.
Our last topic today is a KUNC NPR for Northern Colorado article titled "From Long Wait Lists to High Costs, Finding a Therapist in Colorado is Harder Than It Should Be." In communities across northern Colorado, people are struggling with their mental health while also struggling to get the care they need. Around a quarter of residents reported having poor mental health in the most recent Colorado Health Access Survey. Out of the 1 in 6 Coloradans who were unable to get needed care, nearly half said they had a hard time getting an appointment, while nearly 60% were concerned about cost. Struggling to find care is a common experience, but many people are unaware of their consumer rights. According to the most recent Colorado Health Access Survey, 70% of people who went without needed care said they did not think insurance would cover it. So are you seeing the same issues in Indiana that they're talking about there in northern Colorado?
Yeah. Yes. So access is an issue for a variety of reasons, in terms of there is high demand, and anybody that works inside mental health would tell you that most mental health workers are overworked and underpaid, and they have caseloads that exceed what their caseload should be in terms of for their own mental health, hedging against burnout and these kinds of things. So yeah, access can be a real issue. I think it's interesting because the article rushes to the idea of, well, if we have an access problem, we should expand access. And I think again, this is multifactorial, and what we're doing is we're taking one thread and pulling on it. Like, if we could solve that thread, we'd be better off. And I think it's broader than that. For example, now I don't have great numbers. I didn't have time to dig into everything, but these are questions that the article doesn't raise. Longitudinally, the experience of high anxiety, paranoia, and schizophrenia go up with extended cannabis use. So burdens on the system related to
legalized weed in Colorado, right?
Okay,
yeah.
So nobody's like, well, the system is strained. Maybe we should talk about responsible use, right? So, and I'm not trying to blame the victim, and I'm not trying to say there aren't legitimate mental health needs both within and without the cannabis using community. What I'm saying is the thrust of the article is we need to expand access. And then it's like, and part of that is expanding insurance. So now I'm going to get on a little tiny soapbox about insurance, but I don't take insurance. I tried it for a while, and I specifically rescinded my network privileges because insurance is a fast track to burnout for providers, because the value proposition of insurance is, if you make lower money per client, we will give you a higher volume of client, and then you can make a livable wage. When we talk about insurance, I tell you what, I think insurance is the death of medical care access, because what we're doing is we're doing the short-term solution, which is more volume of care right now, as opposed to playing the long game, which is how can we set up a system where therapists don't have to burn out to do the work they do, so that access is expanded by people staying in the field a full 30, 40, 50 years. And the reality is nobody's having that conversation. So expansion of access is not linear. It's not this idea of more people need to be on insurance. We need more mental health care providers. I think it's a whole nuanced discussion. And then the other thing I would say, a lot of the people that have mental health care needs, this was a self-selected survey. They self-perceive that they need mental health care.
Yeah.
But really what they might need is like some friends, or a church, or a book club, or to take a walk, right? Like, and so I think it's interesting. It's like, well, 25% of Coloradoans say they're not getting the care they need. And it's like, they're not getting the care that they assume they need. Backfill all of my critiques about the echo chamber and grit and all that. It's like, well, just because you think you need it doesn't mean you actually need it. So there's that level of dialogue. Yeah. Then there's all these other layers. So I actually think it's really easy to be like, more insurance, more access. That sounds very satisfying because it's like concrete and linear, and there's kind of like a bad guy. Insurance is the bad guy. But I don't think insurance is primarily the problem. I think it's a problem.
A symptom of,
Yeah, I think
part of it.
Look, I don't love insurance for reasons other than the volume. I mean, insurance is garbage. I don't know if you know this, but like if a woman is assaulted, you brought this up, if a woman is assaulted, I cannot give her care unless I label her as having a disorder, because there is no prophylactic mental health care billing code for insurance. A medical doctor could do a follow-up, right? And in that follow-up, it'd be like, well, we're going to test you for for various kinds of whatever. We're gonna test your system. Did you have these things? And then we can have you for a follow-up to give results on like, did you get a disease or whatever? Okay, but that person that was assaulted cannot come to a mental health care provider unless I say you've got post-traumatic stress or you've got acute anxiety. You have to have a disorder for me to be able to treat you. There's no prophylactic mental health care at all, even if circumstantially you've been involved in something that we know a little bit of front-end help would come a long way. Insurance has no resources for you. So, I mean, I have heavy critiques independent of just access. I think insurance is structured for symptom management, but I actually think the fact that we view mental health care under a medical model, which is symptom management, is part of the problem. We don't have any prophylactic care.
What do you mean by prophylactic?
Okay, so rather than waiting until you're like, I've been in the same yoga pants for a month straight and I don't want to get out of bed.
So proactive.
Yeah, so rather than waiting till you're there when it's like, man, I am noticing that I am just avoiding all my friends and I'm really, like, I'm just feeling super Eeyore. There's no, like, if you just come in and you're like, look, I'm on the struggle bus. I have to, like, in order to bill insurance, I either lie to insurance or I have to, like, really be like, so is that distressing to you while you're at work? Is it also distressing in your private life? Like, I have to really reach for them to meet criteria.
Yeah.
Or what I have to do is say, your insurance isn't going to cover this because you're not mentally ill. You don't have a symptom to manage and treat. So you can become cash pay. So there is no front end. Could we come along before it gets clinically significant and resource you by giving you coping tools and maybe connecting you with some social interactivity and other systems of care that are subclinical? In the mental health model, there's none of that. I mean, some in like Medicare, Medicaid, and maybe VA, but again, it's early, it's not pervasive, and there's not nearly the robust follow through. So we have little on the front end. And then there's a lot of people that fall through these donuts, and then we have you're about to kill yourself care, and we just like don't have right? We don't have great intermediate resources. There's nothing between I'm struggling and clinically significant. There's no care there. And then clinically significant to emergent, there's not like there aren't a lot of community resources for I need intensive, but I don't need inpatient. So we've got these two huge gaps, and the conversations we're not having are about like folding in other sets of resource rather than just let's get more mental health providers. So I think it's a really difficult conversation to have, and I think nobody wants to be the one to say to anybody, I hate to tell you, you don't need me. Go to church or go to a symposium, go to Comic-Con, find your tribe and get people-y. You don't need a therapist. You need to be among the herd.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us again. This has been awesome.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks. I feel like that last one was just me lecturing. I feel bad about that.
You're all good.
It's good.
But hopefully it's useful. And I will say, if you think you need care, reach out for an evaluation, but also reach out to a friend, right? Just maybe that'll help.
That's the first big step,
Yeah,
often,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just to admit, like, something's not right, and you can reach out to a friend as well.
Yeah, and say something's not right here. So start there, and if that doesn't work after 6 months, maybe the other thing. You know?
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this episode of Atypical Talk. If you have any topics or questions, you can send those to atypicaltalkpod@gmail.com. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Atypical Talk Pod, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get updates when new episodes go live. We hope that these conversations today have helped you think wider, love deeper, and partner with God to bring the up there down here in your everyday life. Thanks for listening.